I would like to now welcome Krystian Seibert, Associate Commissioner from the Productivity Commission. I'm sure most of you know him and his work, but if he could come to the stage, please, Krystian, that would be terrific.
Thanks, Nadine, and I've got the difficult job of energising everybody after afternoon tea, so yeah, hopefully that works. Before I go any further, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters where we're meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I also want to acknowledge that Indigenous peoples have practiced traditions of reciprocity and altruism in these lands for many tens of thousands of years, and that these traditions continue to this day. I'm here this afternoon to speak with you for a little bit, 10 to 15 minutes, about the work that we're doing on the Productivity Commission's philanthropy inquiry. I'm not going to be revealing any draft recommendations or anything like that, but hopefully giving you a sense of the work that we've done so far, what we're looking at and where we're going. It is an honour to have been appointed by the Australian Government to co-lead this inquiry by the Commission, and it's also great to be working with the two other commissioners on this inquiry, Alex Robson and Julie Abramson. The kind of people that they are a testament or a reflection of the calibre of the Productivity Commission. So Alex is a highly experienced professor of economics and was previously Australia's ambassador to the OECD. And Julie is a lawyer with extensive expertise in regulatory policy development across corporate, financial services and consumer protection contexts. And she also brings a lot of expertise within the Commission. She's been a Commissioner since 2015. Some of you who attended the Charity Law Association conference yesterday will have seen Julie in action, and you'll understand why it's such a pleasure working with her. We have a great team too that's been put together by our first Assistant Commissioner, Anna Heaney, some of whom are joining online today, and I do want to make a special mention of Matt Muir from the ACNC, who's actually on secondment to us, so thank you ACNC for lending him to us. And Matt's it's that spirit of generosity that we really appreciate. And what's great about that is that Matt's practical perspectives on how the regulatory framework operates are already proving to be really helpful. So thank you very much for that. So the inquiry commenced in February, and as they say, time flies when you're having fun. There is a lot of work to do, and it is work, but because of who I am, I'm genuinely enjoying it. At the conference yesterday, I actually remarked to somebody that I find accounting standards quite interesting, and then they replied that could just be you, Krystian. Could be just because of who you are, and I have come to accept that aspect of me over time. Now, part of why I am enjoying this work it comes down to my passion for better public policy and regulation overall, but also in the context of the not-for-profit sector, which has been the focus of my career since working on the establishment of the ACNC in 2012. But it's also because of the people that we are engaging with as part of this inquiry. And it's an important point that we aren't engaging with organisations, but with people. The Commission's focus is on making evidence-based and actionable policy recommendations to government, and understanding stakeholder experiences and perspectives is an essential enabler of that work. So we've received over 270 submissions in response to our call for submissions that was released in March this year. And that's a very high number for an inquiry, especially an inquiry with a fairly defined scope like this, and that's really pleasing to see. I've written lots of submissions myself in past roles, and I know that they involve a lot of work. And I want to again say thank you to all those in the audience and beyond who've put time and effort into preparing those contributions, and they do make a difference. They are read, and the perspectives that are shared are really helpful, so thank you. Over 350 people registered for a public webinar that we held in April following the release of the call for submissions. And the aim of those types of engagement channels is to try and engage more broadly with the community, people who may not necessarily always participate in a Productivity Commission inquiry, given that it's not probably front and centre for most people to do that. And also brief comments, which you can make as an alternative to a submission at any point in time through our website. That's also a really good way of engaging. We've had over 70 of them. And we've also done 80 stakeholder meetings, or over 80 stakeholder meetings since we started. And we've met with charities, peak bodies, academic experts, philanthropic organisations, private philanthropists and advisors. And we also really appreciate the engagement that we've had with the ACNC. So thank you for that. That's been really helpful in addition to providing Matt. And we also really appreciate the engagement with other regulators, and I want to especially acknowledge with our state and territory government colleagues as well, and it's been great to listen to their perspectives today and hear all of that progress that's happening there. It's also important to point out that we're deliberately seeking perspectives from a diverse range of stakeholders who sometimes might not have their perspectives included in policy development processes, and we really want to understand views about philanthropy and our terms of reference from a range of different angles. Last week we met with a number of LGBTIQ plus organisations to understand their perspectives and experiences, and I do note the Equality Australia decision of the AAT that was published late last week after that meeting, which I've already read, and thanks to Miles and his colleagues for preparing the case note on that decision, which was really helpful and insightful. And just to round off the sort of summary of our engagement so far, we had 3 roundtables a few weeks ago where we were joined by 34 participants, some of you in the room here, to enable us to dive more deeply into 3 particular focus areas: the DGR framework, giving vehicles and measuring effectiveness. And that was really helpful for understanding some of the issues and possible options in the context of those focus areas. And importantly, we have an Indigenous engagement strategy for our inquiry. It's not just a list of stakeholders that we're meeting with, it's a document that sets out our ways of working, and it's informed by a commitment to reciprocity and respect, and aims to ensure that our inquiry is shaped by the perspectives of First Nations people as practising philanthropy as well as engaging with philanthropic organisations, and we've already learnt so much in that regard, and I really want to thank all those from the Indigenous community who've been so generous with sharing their time and their insights with us. So our inquiry is very broad and wide-ranging. As far as I can tell, it's probably the most broad and wide-ranging inquiry of philanthropy commissioned by a government anywhere ever. And if there is something broader and more wide-ranging, I've missed it in the last 6 years of looking for it. So it is very, very broad. We're examining trends and motivations for giving in all their different forms, so the giving of money, the giving of time, and we're looking at all the different data sources, and we really want to thank those that have shared data with us. Really appreciate that. We're also trying to understand why giving doesn't occur, and it's a bit harder to do that because it can be hard to get to those people, but again, there's a lot of research that's been done that we are drawing upon. And we're looking at opportunities for and obstacles to increasing philanthropic giving in Australia, and we're going to be making recommendations about how to address those opportunities and obstacles. And of course, the context for that is the Australian government's commitment to double giving by 2030, which was mentioned by the Assistant Minister earlier today. Now, our approach involves a really strong emphasis on the evidence. What is working? What is not? What should change? What shouldn't change when it comes to policy and regulatory settings? And it also involves recognising that not all the issues and challenges in this context can be addressed through policy or regulatory change. There are limitations to what taxation, regulation, those policy levers can achieve. And it's important to point out that evidence includes qualitative evidence, so the views and narratives shared through our engagement with stakeholders. And it also includes quantitative evidence. So, for example, we're looking at how tax concessions change how much people give. The deduction for donations has existed in Australia's tax system for quite a long time, but very little is actually known about how much the concession changes taxpayer behaviour and encourages giving over and above what people would give anyway. So we are actually drilling down into the data, and we are doing some modelling on that to understand that better, given that does underpin why we have a DGR framework. And the DGR framework is specifically listed in our terms of reference from the government, mind the pun. No laughs there. We are drawing also on available data from the ATO to do that, and we also really appreciate the ACNC's data that it's been providing, including the focus on philanthropy in the most recent Australian Charities report, so thank you for that. Now, when it comes to regulatory settings, which is the focus of today, given it's the Regulators' Day, including the ACNC framework, we are looking at the links between trust and confidence and giving. So we don't want to make assumptions there, in that we just assume that there is more trust and confidence means more giving. We want to test that, given that it is a rationale for regulation, not just in this context, but in other contexts. So there's some recent academic research which examines that, and also there's research on donor attitudes, that sort of thing, which is proving to be really helpful. And we can also draw on experiences around the world in other jurisdictions where trust and confidence has been impacted, and that's had an effect on giving. And once again, I want to thank all those sharing data and case studies as well. We've got a number of organisations who are providing us a lot of helpful information, which is really helping the team with this analysis. I do want to touch on the community-wide perspective that the Commission takes to all of its work, and that we are adopting in the context of this inquiry. So as we start to formulate our views, we adopt this community-wide perspective, which basically means that when we're developing evidence-based recommendations to the government, we look at what we think provides a net benefit to the Australian community as a whole. And that comes from our legislative mandate in the Act that sets up the Productivity Commission, and that's the basis on which I'm appointed as an Associate Commissioner to operate under that Act. Now, of course, there can be different perspectives on what benefits the community as a whole, so we have a very rigorous process within our team for developing our thinking and formulating our views, and it's been really interesting to see that at work. Now, in terms of what's ahead, we expect to release our draft report in November this year, and now the important word there is draft report. It'll set out our preliminary views, and we'll ask for further input and feedback. We'll ask you and others to tell us what you think. We'll have public hearings in February next year, which is a really great open and transparent way to talk about different issues, perspectives, our draft recommendations and findings. And then we'll finalise our recommendations and provide our report to the government in May next year. So now that does look like a long way away, but given how fast the previous 6 months have flown, I expect the next 10 months to fly by very quickly too. Now, if you haven't already, I would encourage you to subscribe to our inquiry through the Commission's website, the Philanthropy Inquiry website. You can sign up your email there, because then you'll receive key email updates during the rest of the inquiry, and we've got a few hundred people that have signed up to that, and I do encourage you to join them. And yeah, on that note, I will finish up, and happy to take any questions or comments, and want to thank you again for the opportunity to join you today and for all your contributions to the inquiry so far, and look forward to engaging with you further throughout the course of the rest of the inquiry. Thank you.
Thanks, Krystian. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, you mentioned earlier that you're involved in legislation in setting up the ACNC, and I know you have worked at Philanthropy Australia and Swinburne. So the question is about how you manage your current role, given your background.
Oh, thanks, Nadine. Yeah, I think my background obviously is working originally in government and then in the sector and being an advocate for better public policy and regulation in the context of philanthropy and the broader not-for-profit sector. And I think it's important to point out that in my role as an Associate Commissioner, I'm no longer an advocate. I am an advocate for good public policy, but I have to adopt that community-wide perspective that I talked about before. So it does sort of require me to really try and look as objectively as possible, and there are limitations to that sometimes, and to really look at the evidence when we are considering what's being put to us, when we're having discussions as a team, and really think about that. And it's not sort of that I have ideas that I've been thinking about for 10 years and I sort of just put them up and people go, oh, it sounds like a great idea, Krystian. Like, you know, we have a process, there's a lot of rigour to this process, to testing ideas, arguments and that sort of thing. But adopting that community-wide perspective also means that when we do have our draft recommendations, we hope that they're well articulated and the evidence base, etc. But there might be different views, there might be some disagreement with us about them, and that's just the way that the process goes. And really look forward to those discussions, and look forward to those views being shared.
Thank you. In terms of those draft recommendations, what is the period of time that people will have to comment on those?
So yeah, we'll provide a number of months, sort of into February basically, and we've got the public hearings then as well.
Right.
So yeah, there'll be quite a good period of time. And again, it's not that you have to put in submissions; brief comments can be made as well, that sort of thing.
Terrific. And one question that I'm sure is not going to surprise you. In terms of DGR and non-DGR entities, do you have any comments on making all charitable donations deductible?
Well, we don't have any views yet. They will be articulated in our draft report, but certainly looking at the submissions, looking at what's been raised with us through our stakeholder engagement, we had a roundtable focused on the DGR framework. The current DGR framework certainly is an issue for many charities, and the submissions do also provide the perspectives and experiences of individual charities. And also the AAT decision that was published last week goes to these questions as well. So it's certainly a big issue, and it's certainly something, the framework that we're looking at. In terms of commenting on that specific proposal, I can't comment on it because we don't have a final view or anything like that yet. But as I said, DGR framework is in our terms of reference. It's certainly something we are focusing on, and yeah, look forward to discussions after November.
Thank you. There's a related question. Can you talk a little bit more, and you may not be able to, on how you're attempting to understand the impact of tax concessions on giving?
Sure. So we're very fortunate to be able to access a special database of de-identified data from the ATO. It's called the A-Life database, and it's used by researchers and others. It's all de-identified, and there's all these protections and things around it. So it's what's called panel data, which provides data over time about taxpayers and their different behaviours, their incomes, their deductions, etc. And you can use that data to model and make sort of get conclusions about how taxpayers react to changes in income and the availability of the deduction, etc. And there are limitations to it as well, obviously, in the sense that not all donations can get a tax deduction, and also some donors make a donation to a DGR and then they don't claim it on their tax return. So there are limitations to it, but yeah, we are undertaking that modelling exercise, and it'll be really interesting to see what the results of that will be. And it's just one input into our thinking, and yeah, for those who are really interested in the economics of it, there will be a technical appendix that goes into all the formulas and things like that.
Great. In considering philanthropy, does your review extend to unregulated areas such as GoFundMe?
That's a really good question. We certainly are looking at the current framework, and we're also looking to the future to understand what changes are happening, the role of technology, the rise of crowdfunding, and as Julie mentioned yesterday at the Charity Law Association conference, there are developments in other jurisdictions. For example, in California, they have developments in terms of the regulation of crowdfunding and platform charities. So we are really looking broadly at that and seeing, what the situation is in Australia, what stakeholders' views are, because we want to see, is the framework fit for purpose now in terms of encouraging giving, the taxation and regulatory framework, but also where is giving going? And given where giving is going, is the regulatory framework going to be fit for purpose into the future?
Thank you. Just on giving, are you looking at whether or not people of different ages give differently? For example, do young people give differently?
So yeah, absolutely. We are looking at the different giving behaviours across ages. We're really mindful of also understanding different cultural perspectives on giving, and there's been some research done on that in Australia as well. We're looking at the geographic impacts of giving in terms of where people give and where people don't give. So we're really slicing all that demographic, those demographic factors in terms of understanding the trends and motivations.
Thank you. There's been a couple of questions come in about sharing or different specific groups that you have consulted with, and if you're able to share any insights from those groups. So we've had some questions about faith-based organisations, LGBTQI organisations. So are you able to give us a bit more information?
Yeah, so we've engaged with all those organisations, and we're still going to be doing more engagement going further as well. And we are very mindful to engage with the range of different stakeholders. And one thing that I've also been thinking about is that how we can engage with those smaller, purely volunteer-run organisations in the outer urban areas, rural and regional areas, because it can be hard to get to them, but we really encourage them, if they do want to meet with us, to engage with us. In terms of some of the perspectives that are being raised, there are some pretty common themes across the range of stakeholders that we are meeting with. DGR does come up a lot, but yeah, in terms of that, what we also do is when we do have our draft report and final report, we cite stakeholders and submissions and things like that, and we include a full list at the end of all the stakeholders that we have met with, who attended our roundtables, that sort of thing.
Thank you. So just thinking about non-financial giving, and we've heard, certainly the ACNC's report on charities indicated a continual decline on volunteering. Are you able to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so the data that we're seeing does indicate that decline is happening, and that's publicly available data. And we do certainly have a focus not just on the giving of money, but the giving of time as well. There are some other processes happening there as well. So there is a process being led to develop a plan for volunteering by Volunteering Australia, supported by the Australian government. And so there are some other processes that are happening as well, but we certainly are looking at what the trends are, what the issues are, what the responses could be, whether there is a policy response that could assist. But we're also looking, when we're looking at, say, the taxation framework or the regulatory framework, even if it's about, say, donating money or, how charities are regulated, we're mindful, for example, that 50% of charities are entirely volunteer-led. Based on the AICD's surveys, the vast majority of charity board members, including myself, I'm chair of a charity, a health promotion charity, are volunteers as well. So when you change things in relation to any of these areas and you consider options for reforms, etc., you need to be mindful of who they impact and the fact that they are volunteers, and that doesn't mean that they may be a lower standard or anything like that, but who has to work with these changes. And so that lens is really important to have over everything that we are looking at.
Thank you. So there's a couple of questions as well about whether or not you're examining the capacity of DGRs and not-for-profits, for example, to engage with potential donors and what we could do more effectively in that space.
Yeah, so, by the way, this is like, I think I've dreamed.
Yeah, no, sorry.
I think I've actually had a dream once where I just asked all these
Oh,
questions
I know.
and I just don't want to wake up. And then when you do wake up, you just reminisce about the dream and wish you were still asleep. So absolutely. So although we primarily have a focus on sort of how much giving in all its forms is there, etc., we are also getting perspectives from stakeholders about how giving is practiced, the benefit of giving, some of the challenges of different types of giving. So we're looking at sort of, how much giving, but also how that giving occurs. And it's coming through too as well that like different dollars from different sources can have a different value to a charity as well. Say fundraising from the mass market or bequests versus grants and donations from structured philanthropy. So we're wanting to understand that. But we are also, getting perspectives around how philanthropy is practiced, and whether we make recommendations about that's another matter, but it's really interesting to get those perspectives. We're getting them in particular from Indigenous stakeholders as well that engage with philanthropy, and understanding those intersections between First Nations Australians and philanthropic funders, and what some of the options could be there.
Great. Well, the dream continues. There's 3 more questions. So the next one is, are you engaging with the institutions that can link donors with recipients on issues such as bequests? For example, solicitors, accountants, public trustees.
So we've engaged with a range of different stakeholders there, like trustee companies and other intermediaries. It's probably an area where we'd like to engage a bit more, like with lawyers that might have some practical expertise there, etc., that we might not have had shared with us, and other advisors. We are interested in the role of advisors. As to whether, again, that there's a role for government in terms of recommendations around that. But we know that there is research about the importance of advisors, and I think QUT has done a lot of that and some of the barriers there. And certainly we are interested in bequests and understanding more there.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about looking overseas. Have you formed any preliminary views as to whether or not Australia should look to overseas regulatory environments?
See, we are looking at developments in other jurisdictions. So I mentioned earlier, for example, when we're looking at, say, trust and confidence and what the links are to supporting a culture of giving, there are experiences in other jurisdictions where there have been quote-unquote crises that impact trust and confidence, and that there's been a measurable impact in terms of giving levels as well. And we are looking at regulatory developments as well. I mentioned California when it comes to crowdfunding and platform charities. We don't have a particular view about, this looks good from over there, etc. But there are different approaches taken, and some of the submissions draw upon that in terms of how support is provided through the taxation system in other jurisdictions, etc. And we are certainly looking at all of that.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a few more questions, but I'm very conscious of time, so we will send them through to you.
Absolutely.
And then we will distribute them back to participants today. So the final question, it's a really important one, is, are you planning on giving Matt back to the ACNC?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a very interesting question. No, Matt's great, and we also have Mario from the ATO as well, and those sorts of secondments, etc., also show the benefit of having a body like the Productivity Commission that can do a process like this, drawing upon people from other Australian government agencies, their perspectives and experiences. But as to anything further, I can't comment on that. That doesn't mean we have any plans, but we really appreciate Matt being with us.
Thank you, and thanks for coming today.
Thanks so much. Thanks.